No?
Is this okay? Now, okay, now it's on.
Welcome to the Roy Branson Legacy Sabbath School, and I am so happy that we have Dr. Joan Sabate with us today. It has literally been years in the making. Again and again, over several years I've asked him to be here, and things just didn't work out till this week and last, and then last week he befell ill. So here we are. We'd scheduled this for a long, long time, but we have you for at least once, and we're delighted for that. One thing that needed to be done before he could be with us is that his second book would be published. This is what was keeping him preoccupied until today or last week. This follows up on the book Vegetarian Nutrition that I think you can find on Amazon too. This one is environmental nutrition, which is for me a new discipline, and I am very interested in it, as is the rest of the class. One other thing is that we have the email list here. If you're not already signed up and you would like to be on our email list, you may sign that and we will send you the notices week by week. So let's begin with prayer. Dear God, thank you for another Sabbath, for another holiday season, another time to think of your birth, and also to think about the world that you made and how we might care for it in our own bodies better. In Christ's name, amen.
Thanks for the invitation, or the opportunity, and I'm sorry that last week I couldn't be here, and I know that some of you were disappointed. This is the third time in my life that I lost my voice. Typically is when you have some upper respiratory infection and then stress. And I was stressed quite a lot on Thursday, the previous Thursday, with one of these conversations with the Dietary Guidelines Committee that I'm part of it. And Thursday night I lost my voice and I didn't get the voice back despite taking all sorts of medications until early Tuesday. Anyway, this reminds me this week of another time that I lost my voice, the first time. It was about 26 years ago. That was after I published my paper, that some of you are familiar, that walnuts lower cholesterol in New England. I was invited to go to Japan. And I went to Japan, and I never been before there, and I had to, make my presentations in scientific forums in English, by then still more challenging than it is now, and it was translated in Japanese. There was no PowerPoint at that time, there were no screens, so just a little TV, so I was under much stress for a couple of days. But I think the California Walnut Commission was preparing a surprise for me. So I was tired, I was under stress, and on the evening, they asked me to go to the podium, for a promotional thing with Miss California, with the crown included. So my sons here and my family here in Loma Linda, they said that I didn't lose my voice. I just was speechless. And that's the reason why I was. So I didn't get speechless to see David Larson. No, that's not the reason. But I went speechless this time. Anyway. The topic of my presentation today is diet, environment, and health. And this is kind of an introduction to the theme. That one of the, I would say, things that will follow is part of the lecture that you were presented the other day. So I think there is a trilemma, and and what do I mean by the diet, environment, and health trilemma? Is when we say diet, is a way or a short way to say dietary patterns, to say agriculture, to say food systems. Nowadays we're moving with food systems. And what is the trilemma? Is trying to balance the requirements of the food supply, the human health, and the physical environment. And this is of great importance for environmental sustainability and for public health. And it requires new priorities, new ways to look at it and probably to operate in a different way. So that's what I mean by this trilemma. The world is facing issues that didn't have some time ago. One is that the population is growing exponentially and continues to grow. It is expected that by the 2050 it's going to be about 9 billion of us here. And there is food for everyone. The production is there. However, 1 billion of people go hungry every night in this world. 2 billions are what we call micronutrients malnutrition. So they don't have enough of the nutritious foods. On the other side, there are roughly 2 billion of people that are overweight and obese. And that is not only in the West, that happens in developing countries. So if you do just short mathematics, we have now 7.5 billions. There is about only 2.5 billions that seems to be not out of any nutritional situation. At the same time, the environments are not sustainable. And what do we mean by that? The natural resources are overgrown. And the ecosystems are degraded, biodiversity loss, and many other things, as we will see. So the president of the International Union of Nutrition Societies, a Chilean physician, Ricardo Waui, said, the most important and urgent issues that confront food and nutrition scientists, and I feel one of them, for the 21st century, are beyond the scope of what is conventionally thought of nutrition as the human biology discipline. Nutrients, Krebs cycles, and things of this sort. We must be willing to encompass the social, the economic, the political, and the human rights dimensions of nutrition. So, nutrition goes beyond biology, and that's what we're going to present today in a little bit. So about 3 years ago, I published this commentary of perspectives in the American Journal of Public Health, which you have in your hands. And today's presentation is going to be kind of an adaptation of this presentation, because we'll go into the environmental nutrition model and several other things that we have. So this was followed just a few months ago, but I received this book this week on the mail. That is Environmental Nutrition, Connecting Health, Nutrition, and with Environmental Sustainable Diets. What is the connection of these three things? So this is an edited book. I wrote a couple of chapters, but also I invited many other persons to do. And basically, besides dealing with the issue of environmental nutrition, it explains the challenges and the solutions that we have for this. Why a well-established researcher on nuts? I'm here and in many places of the world considered as the nutty doctor. So I have a good career just publishing on the wonders and the good benefits of eating nuts, and some of you know about this. That's okay, yes, thank you. Why I move into environmental nutrition in addition to? A physician, that with training, clinical practice and in biology, why moves into the environmental things? Besides having a good friend of mine that unfortunately, we lost, Sam Soret, that was one of the professors at the School of Public Health. I had, I would say, a vision-changing event. This is what inspired me to move or devote my efforts also on what I coined, a few years later, with the name of environmental nutrition. I published in 2005 kind of an editorial or a perspective commenting on an article that was published in a journal, and I titled Religion, Diet, and Research, so RDR. I thought it was just a normal editorial. I mean, I commented some of the things why the Adventist Health Study was relevant and how studying religious groups, I mean, can advance the discipline of nutrition. But there was at that time a group of persons that you are going to meet briefly that wrote this editorial and invited me to go to be part of what they call the Gison Declaration. What is the Gison Declaration? Well, about 20 of us, and as you can see, I'm probably one of the youngest among all these distinguished professors. That was 15 years ago. They locked us in a castle in Germany, and they said, you are not going to leave until you come up with what should be the task of the new science of nutrition. And they call the new science of nutrition. And that was published in Public Health Nutrition. And that is basically the gist of it. The definition of what is nutritional science. Nutrition science is the study of food systems. So not only the foods of nutrients, the study of food systems, foods and drinks, and their nutrients, their constituents. So another constituents such as phytochemicals and other substances that have not yet been classified as nutrients. And their interactions within and between all relevant biological, social, and environmental systems. So this was for me the detonant, or the idea that we have to move beyond biology if we really want to tackle the real issues of this world. So, particularly as far as the environment, what are the real issues? Is that during the past century, by that mean the 20th century, there has been what they call, the specialists in this area, an ecological overshot. Human activity has stressed and pushed the limits of the natural environment. Humanity has been using more resources than can naturally be replenished. Humans are outstripping the regenerative biocapacity of the natural resources, biodiversity. And the natural forces have been disturbed to a point of uncertainty. So what should be done? Basically, researchers, especially environmentalists, they clearly said in Nature, one of the leading scientific journals, that the size and economic activity of mankind is exceeding sustainable capacity of the natural world. So 3 biophysical thresholds in the natural system have already been crossed or trespassed. And they point to these 3: climate change, biodiversity lost, and the geophysical flows of nitrogen and phosphorus. And I said, wow, nitrogen and phosphorus, that sounds something that relates to nutrition, so I need to know more about this. So they put this graphic that instead of seeing just the bars, they put kind of in a circle that means the globe. And you can see here that in green is the threshold, that beyond that, I mean, there is a level of uncertainty of what is going to happen in the future. And we see that the climate change, but second, the biodiversity is off the records, and also the cycle of the nitrogen with the abuse that we do of the fertilizers, and more to come later or during the questions. So what do we need to do? I mean, to really keep, I mean, the planet health, or the planetary health. We have to limit the use of Earth resources within a finite boundaries. That's one thing. So I mean, not use resources more than what they can naturally be replenished. The second thing is the avoidance of the environmental degradation. Sometimes it's not that we use more resources, but also in addition, we degrade, I mean, the environment. The earth we breathe, the water we drink, I mean, the soil for which we plant our crops. So, and that is basically the proposition, that it was somehow novel, I mean, at least in the general public some time ago, but now I think it has been well accepted, at least by the general public, that the planetary health, and I think in this community we also know that the human health, are measured consequences of the food systems and the dietary choices. because as we will see, the two are very intimately related, although different. So the food system is responsible for measure of the environmental impacts of all the energy that is consumed at the global level, at the universal level. 30% is coming or is used by the food system. So 1/3 of the energy. Between 20 to 30% of the greenhouse gas emissions are coming from the food system. And of these 20 to 30%, and 80%, so 4/5, is particularly from the raising of livestock and dairy industry. 70% of all human water use comes from the food system. So it's good to have short showers and to put a cover on the pool. Yes, I mean that. But I'm saying 70% doesn't come from, of the things comes from the food system, the way to produce food. And 80% of the world's deforestation is due to the food system. And as you know, I mean, the forest, particularly tropical forest, is most of the biorepository, I would say, of the biodiversity. So by the changing of the land use, I mean, we lose many things, not only producing of CO2, but also we have a loss of the different diversity. So this is in a graphic way that I think was presented in the lecture last week, but I would like to review because that is important, is that of all the global greenhouse gas emissions, 1/4 comes from the production of electricity and the heat production. And at the same part is by the agricultural and food systems. So the food systems produces more CO2 than any other human or economic food sector, such as industry, transportation, buildings, I mean of the new hospital, and any other thing. So the food system is very relevant as far as the greenhouse gas emissions. In this community, I don't think I have to extend, I'm just going to use this slide and nothing else, that we already know the connection between the food system and dietary patterns and human health, obesity, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and so on and so forth. All of these conditions contribute to decrease of the quality of life, as well as early mortality. I'm not going to extend on that because I assume that everybody of this knows. So this is, in a graphic way, I mean, how these three forces interact. The food systems and the dietary patterns, we said, I mean, impact on the health of the planet and also impact on the health of the individuals and populations. And here we have a list of the things. The planet is affected by increasing of the greenhouse gas emissions, deforestation, biodiversity loss, soil and water contamination, altered nitrogen cycles. And what happened as the effects of the food system and the dietary patterns. So as we said, is basically malnutrition and what some calls overnutrition and early mortality resulting. But the environment or the planet is just not sitting there doing nothing. I mean, the planet responds. And by this environmental contamination, lack of resources and sustainability, it impacts back to the food systems. Because, I mean, it's in the planet that we, the fisheries and the husbandries and the crops are produced. It's in the natural world. So it results in decreasing of unprecedented yields, unpredicted yields, limited drinking water resources, and food insecurity. What happens with the human health? Many things, but I'm just going to say that the spread of infectious disease. So these things is what how the nature responds to, I would say, the insults of the food system. So let's just take the same sentence in a different way. Global food systems and dietary patterns have become major culprits of environmental degradation and human disease. I'm not going to dwell on that. I'm just going to now try to say why. Are there any solutions? If that happens just overnight, and all of a sudden now we realize this, or is something that has been going on for millennia, or is just a recent phenomenon? Let's focus on the food systems, agriculture. Let's start saying that agriculture and the way the food is produced and consumed has changed dramatically, particularly in the last 2 centuries. And let's say one thing, especially in this group that is much in esteem of the culture and intellectuals. Agriculture is the foundation of civilization. So agriculture is not bad, it's the foundation of civilization. Modern civilizations will not exist without agriculture and agricultural production. Shifting from hunting and gathering to crop cultivation and animal husbandry allow the generation of surplus food, and this then division of labor, and that enable the development of large settlements and civilizations. So without agriculture, we will not be here, and we have not evolved culturally. So any culture that have developed, on things that now we esteem, is because they had a well-established agricultural system. So agriculture is good, is positive, is necessary. However, there has been an evolution of agriculture that is reflected in one chapter of the book, that from ancient agriculture, hunting and gathering and domestication of some plants and animals, to traditional and pastoral agriculture, I'm going to describe in a graphic after this slide, is the picture that we have on TV when they say, the cows, just eating grass and the bucolic, the picturesque. That's the traditional farming and husbandry. However, we have moved far away from this into modern agriculture with the Green Revolution and the invention of the pesticides and the fertilizers. And then in the last few decades, we have what is called the industrial agriculture and the globalized food systems. So what are those? Basically, this is the traditional pastoral model, a sustainable model. The energy comes from the sun. There is a special temporal complexity with polycultures. Animals and crops are in the same farm, and one helps the other. There is very little transportation. The manure of the animals is good for the fertilizer, and there is changes and rotations of the crops, so on and so forth. So this is the traditional model, I would say the pastoral agriculture as well. But that is not the way that things work. So how is the industrial agriculture? The industrial agriculture has not only tractors, but many other machines that are oil propelled. So it's basically the energy comes from fuel, from petrol, from gas, from electricity. So basically, and most of this is non-renewable resources. There is high inputs. By inputs not only of energy, but also of water. We force water, not waiting for the rain. We put chemicals that take a lot of energy to produce, such as nitrogen, so on and so forth. We specialize in monocultures. There is no rotations of crops, and we have separated, the crops from the animals. So there is a completely separation of the two things. So the modern industry agriculture has some also positive aspects, but improvements in farming techniques lead to a greater yields and reduction of labor. And the labor, at least since it went slow, could devote to the industry and other aspects. Now that's another issue. Today, most large-scale agricultural systems employ an industrial model. So it's like production like an industry, using considerable resources to maintain, mainly coming from oil. Industrial agriculture operates on a system of monoculture in which crop systems are generally decoupled from the animal systems. And what is going on in the last 2 decades is what we call the current global food systems. Food production and distribution have shifted from a regional focus to a global focus. So things that are produced in California are consumed all over the world, and vice versa. So this allows for yields optimizations that are afforded by local conditions. So California has a climate for specific things, and another region does something else, another part of the world something else. And then by containers or by plane, things move across like any other goods. And the advantage is that they provide consumers around the world with foods either not in season or not grown locally. So if you go to the supermarket, you can get anything you want. Not only 24/7, I'm saying the 365 days of the year. But this has a cost. Not only economic cost, environmental cost. So this is the food life cycle. Not only takes care of agriculture, because once we hardly ever we get, except from our own home garden or vegetable garden, the foods that we purchase or cook at home, go through a process that is the agricultural production, the processing, the packaging, transportation, storage, retail, and then preparation of cooking, whether at home or in the restaurant, and finally disposal. So this is what we say is the life cycle of the food, and it takes a lot of energy. It has been estimated that for the US food system, the energy that is put into the food that we eat every day, it goes from the agriculture and the processing, transportation, and the home, is about 10 to 11 times more than the energy that we get from the food we consume. In other words, the energy needed to produce an apple, or to produce steak, or to produce on average, it's about 11 times more. But this energy doesn't come from the sun. It comes from where? From oil. So if you think it carefully, what we are eating is oil, a non-renewable resource. That's the way that modern agriculture works. So this is just to illustrate. It's not like in the past, and that is an illustration, that is from traditional to modern agriculture, and here it is, the industrial agriculture uses more energy than it gives back in food. So this is the ratio of the energy that is put into the production versus the one that is getting back. So in very, I would say, shifting agriculture or hunting and gathering, you see the ratio is 0.1 or 0.1. So in other words, 10 to 100 more times we use energy, less than what we get back. So the farmer that was walking to the fields, toiled the whole day and went back with the crop and fed himself and his family, is in this situation. But now the farmers go with an SUV, use a big tractor, planes, do whatever. So we are in this situation in which we put 2, 5, 10, or even 20 times more of energy into the production of foods than what we actually get out of it. So clearly an unsustainable enterprise. That's what it is, the modern food systems. So to understand this and to put things in context, I developed what we call the environmental nutrition model. It's putting everything that we said in a condensed form or in a graphic form. But let's say what is the environmental food system first. The basic food system. The food system is like any other food. I'm going to be finishing soon. Like any system, it has inputs, drivers, and outputs. So here we have the resources, inputs, then the outputs, the desirable output is the food. And then we have the undesirable outcome, which is waste or pollution. We have basically the societal demands, that is the driver of the food system. Let's put that in a more detailed way and with different colors. If we divide the food system in two big chapters, or the two things, one is the natural world. Without the natural world, there will be no food system. But the other is the human societies. So the food life cycle, which is this is the food system, has inputs coming from the natural world, the land, the solar radiation, the water, the fossil fuels, the chemicals, so on and so forth. And those are the ones that make the agriculture, the livestock, and the fisheries. That's the natural world. Why do we do all this? To produce food. So this is the desirable outcome. But what drives the food system? Basically the societal demands. Either the consumer preferences, the policies, the technology. I mean, what is able to produce now has nothing to do with a century ago, because the technology was not there. Marketing, social dynamics. And what results in all of this? Goes back to the natural world, the pollution, the solid and fluid waste, biological contaminants, greenhouse gas emissions, so on and so forth. So, as you can see, based on this food system, we can see the connection very clearly of what happened with this, with food insecurity. So, climate change, for instance, produce low regional food yields. I'm doing a clinical trial in Kenya, in dry land, in which corn has been promoted for 2 generations and now is failing because it's too dry. And one of my colleagues and previous doctoral student wants to go into pearl millet. So things are changing and fails, and the crops are failing, and that produces food insecurity, which contributes to the malnutrition and deficiency diseases. So this is just an example of the connection between the food system and, I would say, food insecurity. So, these are the challenges of the modern food systems, that each one of the arrows has a challenge. And each one of these arrows goes in one chapter of the book. So, one is the constraints of the natural resources. The natural resources are not renewable, and there is constraints in many aspects. The other one is the unsustainability that the societal demands place on the food system. Why is so, and why continues to be so? The adverse health and nutritional outcomes on large segments of the population due to the types of foods that are produced and consumed. And also the undesirable environmental degradation related to the current food production and consumption practices. These are the 4 challenges that the current food system and dietary patterns face today, at least according to my estimation. So, what are the solutions? To address these challenges, 3 approaches have been proposed and are being explored in the scientific literature. One is improvements in agricultural technology. What do we mean by that? Anything that goes to a better irrigation system that saves water, all the way to genetic manipulation, to have animals, grow faster, therefore they produce less methane, because they are alive for less years or less months. And many other things in between, such as, for instance, from a place where there is animals confinement, and many of the chicken or pork factories, I'm using the word factories because it's used thing, is to have the CO2 and the methane or whatever, just go in a tube underground and let it sink into the soil. So, there are many technological things that are being studied as far as how, improve, or have the production of food less damaging to the environment, in a way. Another one is reduction in food losses and waste along the supply chain. I'm not going to cover all of this, I'm just explaining what I mean by that. It is estimated that between 30 to 40% of the food, particularly in Japan, Europe, and United States in the West, is just waste. And there is about another percentage, 10 to 25%, that is lost. Loss is before, food loss is before it reaches the consumer, and food waste is when it reaches the consumer, from the retailer on. So it's a dramatic amount of food that if that would not be produced, then it's going to be the food systems will decrease the impact on the environment. And another solution is shifting food choices and diet patterns of individuals and population. So change the food choices. So the 3 proposed solutions for the food system point towards sustainable diets. These are the three solutions that are being explored in generic terms. So anything that you can think probably will fit in one of these three solutions. But this has kind of a, it points towards something. Basically, what is the improvement in the agricultural technology? Basically, it points towards what? Producing the same food and consuming the same food, but in a more benign form. So the supermarkets will still be the same, and the table still will look the same. That's one thing. And our food habits still will do the same. Reduction of food losses basically resulting in what? Less the need of producing less food. Because if this system that is so much important and contaminant for the environment is reduced by 30% or 40% at the global level, that's a major impact. So, and the final thing, shifting the food choices, is producing different types of foods. Because, of course, if the consumption has shifted, in a market economy, they are not going to continue producing the same foods. They are going to adapt to the consumer demands. So these are basically the three things. So now it's time for sharing, responding. And in case, I'm sure that you have many questions or many comments. I have thought about three. We don't have to follow those, but this is one. Shall we care about the environmental sustainability? Aren't those signs of the times? Second, since most of us are vegetarians, or at least flexitarians, are we already doing our part? And finally, what else can the Adventist Church do for the healing of the planet, not the nations, of the planet? Anyway, I just proposed these ones, but I don't have any particular interest. I'm sure that you have more interesting issues to say or address.
Thank you so much for some very stimulating thoughts. It seems to me, I'd like to just go one step rather than answering your very provocative questions, just and talk about theology a little bit, in that we have the blessing on this campus of having a school of religion and ethics and theologians, etc., that I think could contribute. One of the things I think that the Adventist Church does well is that we've concentrated on a theology and ethic of sort of personal purity and growth, and nutrition has been part of that, and health and right arm of the message and all of those good cliches, and it's all true. One of the things that seems to me to be a bit of a problem is that the other side of our theology is what I call the magical thinking theology, or the otherworldly theology, or the there will be a planet B. We really don't need to do too much because the Lord's coming, He's going to be purified, it's going to be a new earth, etc., etc., etc. And I wonder sometimes whether this emphasis on theology actually enshrines or breeds into us we don't need to do anything. Because if we're really pure to our theological roots, we should be cheering on the end of the planet. And so I think we've got a philosophical sort of brick wall there. And I don't know what, you're obviously a very talented scientist. Do you want to have a go at theology as well?
Well, I don't know much about this. I thought that you were going to respond to the question, or maybe some of others. One of the things I can go back is, to Genesis, when you say, are we going to be, have exercise dominion over this earth, or another translation is, to be stewardship. So I think the whole thing goes to this concept. Are we here to, dominate the earth and its inhabitants and whatever, or are we going to be good stewards? I think this is, to me, it depends of how you translate this word and how you live this text. I mean, you are going to go in one direction or another. That's the only thing I can say. In theology, okay? I can say in other things, but I mean, as far as theology, that's the only thing I can say.
Over there. I thought there was something. Oh, okay. I have a question. First, let me say one thing. The food amount that we throw away in the United States could feed all the 2 million people who are who don't have enough food to eat. Is the problem really, is it really, what are we talking about? It doesn't seem probable that we'll be able to change all this. This is progress. It's not gonna go back because too many people are making too much money. I think the main thing is about learning how to divide the food that we make, because we make so much that we're throwing away so much. And another thing I'm concerned about is we talk about grain instead of meat. Even if we don't eat the meat, the cow will still be used for the other things that it gives, like milk, yogurt, and shoes, leather, all of that. It doesn't. It sounds good on paper, and we all know that it's better for our health to not eat certain things. But how really does this help the hungry? What are we talking about now?
I think my presentation was not on the hungry. That was on the planetary health and environmental sustainability. But I agree with you that the issue of hunger in this world is not an issue of lack of food resources. It's an issue of distribution of these resources. So this is very important. I mean, this is a traditional aspect of public health nutrition, but we're not presenting this, we're not trying to say that we have to do changes because of the hungry people. I mean, hungry people have always been there, and unless we change the economic and political and distribution systems, they will be regardless of these solutions, okay? So by reducing the waste I presented is a way to reduce the production of food, not to solve the problem of the hungry, okay? So let's...
Over here.
Sorry.
Yeah, I think the Adventist system has been very limited for many years to the individual, and I think it's time for it to grow, to expand to a planetary level. I don't know what kind of comments do you have, or what suggestions do you have to progress to that? Because I think the system, as the health message as it stands, is very limited.
Yes, I think I can concur with you, but, and I will try to share a little bit of my opinion, but I wouldn't like to be trapped that because I'm presenting this or I'm doing research on that I'm responsible now for what the church is going to do or how to disseminate this message. Yes, sometimes I get some of these comments by the dean or by administrators of the university. So, as a co-investigator of the Adventist Health Study or doing things, we produce scientific things, but I mean, this is not our mandate, neither our job, I mean, to disseminate this. There are health educators, there are budgets for other dissemination. So, what I'm saying is, I think just presenting here, I mean, is my little contribution. That's one aspect. Publishing is my contribution. But I do think the Adventist Church, I mean, with many of the things that has done traditionally, now there is a confluence, I mean, with what society is preaching or trying to do or saying things. So, in my humble opinion, I think the Adventist Church at the local, at the intermediate, at the global level, I mean, could generate, I mean, enthusiasm, I mean, and activities in what I would call the green evangelism. I think we have not only, we have to move from the health evangelism, not from, but I'm saying, in addition to the health evangelism, we have to go into the green evangelism. How, I mean, our lifestyle and our way to do things, the ones that are done and the ones that needs to be done, I mean, will be relevant, I mean, for younger generations, because that is the mindset of the younger generations. Because after all, doesn't matter what is done, I mean, the majority of people in this room, I mean, we're fine. And it's basically our grandchildren and the great-grandchildren, the ones that, I mean, are going to suffer the consequences. And they are the ones motivated. And as you know, I mean, this high schooler from Sweden is the one that got the Person of the Year by the Time magazine, I mean, just last week. So I'm saying the younger generation is the one that, I mean, are the engine. Right here.
I want to thank you too, Joan. This is a great presentation combined with last week.
Thank you.
Glad you got your voice back.
Are you going to give me a hug afterwards?
Yes,
Okay.
Absolutely. You mentioned 3 solutions. You talked about technological efficiency, learning how to do it better and using less energy. And also you talk about dietary changes so that we produce different types of food that presumably you mean consume less energy and, right. You didn't talk about population control. And it seems to me that that is a big factor in all of this. And I just kind of wondered what you think about that. In other words, we just need fewer people needing to be fed. And I just wanted to also say that
Are you proposing the atomic bomb?
well, I was kind of wondering about how much how much our saving of lives has contributed to the problem.
I think you have raised a very relevant question. I mean, what happened in the 20th century is not only these changes, but really an explosion of the demography. I mean, if you go into all these graphics, the population was relatively small and growing very slowly, but all of a sudden in the 20th century, I mean, not only double, triple, and quadruple, and all these things. I'm not a demographer. However, you know, by the changes in culture and many things and education, the population still is growing, but the natality rates are decreasing. So according to the demographers, and the UN, I mean, has many reports on that, is expected by the year 2050, so it will reach a plateau. So all the readings that I have done and I've seen is that they are concerned about that we're concerned. I mean, what we have to be concerned is about the 9 billions. After 9 billions, the population will be stable, or probably then will start decreasing. So it's not that it's going to continue growing non-stop, that in about 30 years, I mean, the population of the world will get stable. How to control the population, there are many things. I mean, I'm not going to go into this.
I thank you for your presentation, very stimulating. It does
You're
open
welcome.
up lots of possibilities for discussion and worthwhile for us to try and narrow down some areas. So I'm thinking that for Adventist universities, a productive area might be dealing with the production of plant-based foods. That is probably something where there's a lot of possibilities. For example, I was given recently a very stimulating book called Dark Emu on the history of agriculture in Australia. So there was a deliberate distortion of history that Aboriginal people were hunter-gatherers, when in fact they had well-developed agriculture for thousands of years. Now that was a perennial, they were growing perennial food, grains, which didn't have to be totally restored each year. And they were able to grow these grains up to the middle of the outback of Australia, up to round about Uluru or Ayers Rock. So one of the things that we might look at is what are the plants that are well suited to the United States, to Africa, to other places, so that we encourage each of those areas to develop their own plants that are more suitable for their environment, whereas Monsanto is trying to sell everybody the same wheat, which is not necessarily well suited to those countries.
Good idea. Thank you.
Right here.
My question follows along with issues that have already been raised, but I wanted you to answer your third question. If you have any more specifics that you could answer your third question with.
For the second and third, I mean, I have a whole presentation that's, I mean, I wanted to do, but since I know that Dave Larson, after the time, I mean, they cut you, I have, in case I was going, I can do. We could talk about sustainable diets. What is a sustainable diet on lifestyle that addresses the second and the third. And we started this conversation, I say, backwards, because since I was ill, I mean, it was presented one of the solutions of a sustainable diet, which is the vegetarian diet. But I mean, there are many other aspects, I mean, to accomplish a sustainable diet that, I mean, needs to be also be in consideration and addressed and explored. So yes, the solution is a sustainable diet that implies, by the way, these solutions are not mutually exclusive. And some of the best minds, and in the last 2 years, I mean, there has been a few publications trying to even compute, I mean, what is going to be the improvements or the savings, adopting 1, 2, or 3, adopting the 3, if it's adopted 50% or not, and all came to the conclusion that probably the third, without the third, nothing nothing, there is not a complete solution. So the third now, in the last 5 years, is when now we're tackling, at least at the global level, in the scientific literature. But I'm saying solution number 2 is the one that is now fashionable, I mean, in popular, I mean, everybody is saying, I mean, from the USDA, I mean, to the city halls, I mean, as far as what to do with the excellence of food and so on and so forth. The number 1 has been the one that has been more investment placed. I mean, about 15 years ago, I went to the USDA and tried to push for solution number 3 to get funds to do research. They were invested in solution number 1. Basically, they put the resources in solution number 1. And also that happens in the EU. I mean, I'm not saying that's in the US thing. I mean, it's basically, that is what stimulates more, you know, the business and also the palate. I mean, just keep the same thing, but I mean, producing in a more effective or less detrimental way. But I think the 3 are necessary. I mean,
The question that I was wanting you to answer was about what the Adventist Church could do. The questions that you wrote yourself,
yes.
I was wanting to know if you could say more about what the Adventist Church could do to help this problem.
Well, I think, as I pointed, I mean, I think what the Adventist Church is already doing things and has been doing things. I mean, as I said, most of us here either are vegetarian or flexitarians. I mean, I doubt that many of us here follow a diet typical of the American. So it's already, I mean, cooking from scratch and doing many other things. I mean, even though things have evolved and our homes doesn't operate as 2 generations ago, but are a far cry from the average home and the way we invest. So we already are doing, not only, and also by example, and things of this sort. But there is now much more that could be done, and in my opinion, to engage the younger generations. I mean, what beyond that, I mean, can we do? And the issues of from cleaning the fields to plastic to, I mean, there are 100 things, I mean, that could be done, and I don't see why that could not be something that the younger or the juniors, I mean, could do it. I mean, as a way to get, you know, action and in the mindset and things of this sort. And as I said, I wish, I mean, we could develop a kind of self-education or group dynamics, I mean, that goes into explores the different aspects that could be done as a Saturday afternoon activity for the young or the adults, or changes in lifestyle and things of this sort.
Back here in the back.
Yes, thank you very kindly. There are many questions that have risen in my own mind. You have limited yourself, you're a scientist, you're not a prophet. But I'm wondering whether we are making progress at all globally, or whether we are, in fact, the opposite is occurring. And whose responsibility is it ultimately? The United Nations? I don't think they're making significant progress. Is it the church? The scientists? Who? Do we need a prophet? Because globally, it doesn't seem as though this thing is making significant progress. Some of these little things that you've mentioned, these things you mentioned are important. We can individually do what we can do, but are we really making progress globally? We are stewards of this creation. Therefore, I ask the question, whose responsibility? Is it the churches? And if it is the church, then the church should become like John the Baptist, a prophetic voice speaking, or is it the United Nations, or who?
I think everybody, the individual, the families, the communities, and one of the communities, the church, the industry, the social leaders, the politicians. As you know, 10 days ago I started in Madrid, I mean, again, the environmental summit that was scheduled to be in Chile, but due to the political unrest, it was moved to Madrid. And all the politicians gathered and everybody said all these speeches, and the EU announced that they're going to put 1,000 billions, or I don't know, or $1 trillion, I mean, to do this and that. Now that the conference is closing, when you really have to commit and sign the document, I mean, they're fighting. But that has happened, I mean, for the last other summits, so it's difficult. You know, United States committed in Paris, and then now is trying to get out of the agreement, the current administration. So, it's everybody. I mean, we cannot just blame the politicians. I mean, we have to start with ourselves, but our families, I mean, our communities, the church that we belong and that we love and we contribute, but the industry, the way, I mean, we do the shopping, the way we conduct ourselves.
Could I propose that we need more little children, young people, like Greta Thunberg? A little child shall lead them.
Okay, Peter, and then Jan, then we'll call it a day. I'm sorry? Well, Susan been waiting here. Go ahead, go ahead.
I also want to add my thanks to for this timely presentation. It does make a difference how we all treat our planet and what we do with it. I was just reading an application this week from an applicant who was describing their 2-summer volunteer project working in a Latin American nation, working side by side with farmers and helping them to realize that their trash disposal methods were affecting their soil, which impacted their the quality of the food they ate, and then in turn impacted their health. So he's working with them, or this project, this organization is, and so that's one way where people can get involved to help communities learn how to use their agricultural resources better.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter.
Peter, then Jan.
Yes,
I was missing you. I mean, you have to every day you have to say something. Yes. I'm not prepared though.
Not necessarily. Thank you, John, for the presentation. I have a short comment first and then 2 questions, quick questions. We should be very good stewards of the planet. But I think in the same time we should be very careful not to worship the planet, because we worship the creator of the planet. And the first question is still popular in the scientific world, the Malthusian theory. Are you familiar with that?
It goes on and off. I mean, some they say yes, others say it's not politically correct, and that's what they mentioned. There is not much that I'm reading on this, but yes, I mean that is there, and reading the articles sometimes in the discussion appears. I mean, and is mentioned.
In your evaluations of the resources of the planet, have you included the law of the sea? Are you familiar with that?
The law?
The law of the sea.
The law.
Law of the sea.
LAW.
No, the law, no.
Okay. Have been discovered on the bottom of the oceans immense resources that being exploited will solve a lot of problems. Yeah, this is my question, if you are familiar with that, and if you consider, yes, if you took into consideration when you made this evaluation of the resources.
Okay. I think what, if I understood your idea, is that the new discoveries, I mean, can solve current issues in general, and that the discovery of new resources or new technology or new ways, yes, this is a potential solution. I mean, and I, as a scientist, I'm in favor of researching things and discovering and investing on that. But I would not just rely, I mean, on the new discoveries. I mean, also we have to do things that are in our hand. I mean, besides thinking that technology or discoveries will put solution to the current problems. Jan?
The takeaway for me this morning is that we need green evangelism in our church. And I love the idea of, you know, the passion of Greta Thunberg, the marketing skills and funding of Michael Bloomberg, funnel that type of thing into a green school of evangelism, you know, church-wide, worldwide, stimulated by the School of Health. Perhaps there could be a division in the School of Health for green evangelism or somewhere at Loma University. I love that idea.
Probably a conjunction of School of Public Health and, you know, School of Religion or other places, because this has to do with the church. I mean, it cannot be just a secular collection of facts. I mean, we have to put into a context. But as you see, I mean, it has to be a good climate, resources invested into these, human resources and other type of resources. But to me, that is clear. I mean, we are developing resources, I mean, for do other things, and we try new plans, and it looks like this thing, the secular society or the society is catching up, and we're going to become irrelevant as far as a topic that I think it has been present, at least in our ethos, for many generations.
Thank you so very much. And we will have you back. One of Roy's hopes was that we would have closer contact with the School of Public Health than we have in the years past, and I think we will work on that here. A couple of announcements. In January, things will be very full. I won't say too much about it, but the first Sabbath in January, January 4, will be a big day. We'll have Dr. Thomas Orr, who is a theologian in the Nazarene community here, for 2 sessions in the morning, and then in the afternoon, the other class down here, Sabbath seminars, will join us in this room. So our plan is that you will go to early church, then Sabbath school, then in the afternoon. All right, January 4, so start planning for that now. The other thing is that the Zershur class starts right here at 12 o'clock. After that, and then finally, but most importantly, this would have been a very, very special day for Roy had he been alive, because his protege, Leo Ranzelin, was chosen to be the new dean of the School of Religion, and no one was more responsible for Leo being here than Roy. So let's... And I think under new leadership, we will have an increased interest in the School of Public Health. At least we have one supporter of that, right? Okay, here we go. Let's have the benediction.
The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace.
Amen.